going on, y'all? Welcome to another episode of Perfect Time of Multisport. Sorry. Today I have my great friend Leslie here joining the podcast and the interview today. How you doing?
I'm good.
Doing good?
I'm good.
You ready for this guy?
It's been non-moving this weekend.
I know.
Just non-stop.
Yeah. I'm excited to hear and share about that. Hold up. Sorry about that. I originally met Leslie through District Tri. Her just being an amazing athlete, she was always somebody I gravitated towards. And the reason I did that is because although she is this amazing athlete, she was always like this really humble person, right? So she always sitting here training for Boston, and we'll get into that. And she's like, oh, I'll just chill today and run with the slower folks, me and myself. So it was just always something I love. But for the folks that don't know you, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from? Yeah, let's start with that.
I was born in Peru. I always say that because I'm very proud of my roots, my Peruvian roots being from Latin America. Yeah. I grew up in Connecticut. My parents somehow missed New York and Florida and all these other states and went to a very cold state. But I grew up in Connecticut.
Okay.
And then
what part of Connecticut?
Hartford, Heartbeat, which is actually really good because it had a lot of community activism and lots of art, lots of soul. So I'm very proud of Hartford and being from there and growing up from there.
All right. Well, our sponsor, Athletic Brewing Company, they're actually based out of Hartford, Connecticut, if I'm not mistaken. Unfortunately, we don't have any beer today, so Mason, if you're watching this, we need some, bro. No, I'm just kidding.
For sure.
So can you tell me a little bit about your experience or what you remember when you transitioned from Peru to now Connecticut?
Ooh, I was very young when I moved.
How old were you?
I was 7. I turned 7 here. Actually.
Okay.
So I turned 7 here. I was I'm one of 4 girls. And I had the first birthday party here, which was really exciting. So it's like, my mom had actually moved a few years earlier to make sure that we had enough money to send over, so that we moved here. And it's very traditional in Latin America to have at least one person, either a parent, an older sibling, who will come in earlier and work really hard so that they can have the family come over.
Yeah.
So I grew up without I remember my mom not being around when I was very young.
Yeah.
And then when I got to see her here, it was like just a beautiful moment.
Yeah.
It was so beautiful, and she was so excited to see us that she fed us all McDonald's. It was just like McDonald's everything, Happy Meal everything, and then that evening we woke up and we puked everywhere. We were not used to that kind of diet, But I remember not being able to speak English and pointing to things and growing up in that kind of very immigrant, culture of things are new and different. It's cold. I actually came in the summertime and I had this vision of the United States of it being extremely cold, so I was layered up.
Yeah. And
I remember flying with all these layers. And then I got here and it was warm. The Connecticut was really warm. I was a season off.
Yeah.
But growing up in a very beautiful family, and then we got winter in Connecticut and it was freezing.
And how old are your sisters? You said you're one of 4, right?
I'm one of 4. Yeah, there's Gio, who is 3 years older than me, and then Pamela, just a year and a half younger than me, and then Mary, who's 3 years younger than me.
Okay.
So it was we're only 6 years apart, so we're extremely close to each other.
Okay.
There was a moment in which we used to fight a lot. We used to fight all the time, actually, when we were growing up. And my mom got tired of coming home and seeing us missing hair and having bruises. We were rough. Girls tend to be rough. There's this misconception that girls are we're calm. Girls are rough.
Yeah. Sisters
are rough sometimes. When you wear someone else's clothes, that's my dress. That's my shoes. And so she signed us up to karate. So I grew up, my mom was just if you guys want to fight, you guys gotta fight the right way. You gotta learn about your opponent, learn about, how to understand what fighting really is about, the true martial arts of it. So I grew up doing karate, most of, since I was in 4th grade. So every once in a while, I do a kick or something,
Yeah.
And then, you know, I did Wing Chun for a while too. So
What's Wing Chun?
Oh, you never heard of Wing Chun?
I've never heard of Wing Chun.
Okay.
Have y'all ever heard of Wing Chun?
Yeah.
It's from southern China.
Okay.
I actually got into Wing Chun because I did a lot of karate. I did a lot of like different types of martial arts. And when I went back to Hartford, because I moved around, and I came back to Hartford, and I became an EMT. So I was working in an ambulance, and I worked nights. I worked different hours. And a lot of the areas I worked were not safe.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the thing about Hartford. As much of a beautiful city as it is, you know, it can be a very poor community at times, and it's an urban community, and you see a lot of things. And so I was very happy to be able to serve the community I grew up in, and I knew it very well, but now I'm serving it in a medical capacity. And there were times where I would go into calls and it would be crazy. It's like just different types of, sometimes very dangerous situation for a woman.
Right.
And I'm a small woman, I'm tiny, I'm tough, but I am small, and so it brought me back into making sure that I can protect myself and being safe. So I got back into martial arts like I did in my childhood. And the martial art I did was Wing Chun, which is from southern China, and the whole concept is it's very traditional martial arts, where it's about you know, there was a time in China which they were trying to erase all of the martial arts, and it was only the nuns who knew how to do it. And so this is a martial arts that women do, nuns do, in which they it's for a petite body, petite. It's not supposed to be about strength. It's about how to use your opponent's strength against them, how to go against movement. So like Jackie Chan and Bruce Lee and all of the famous martial artists really come down to Wing Chun. And so like Ip Man, if you've ever seen Ip Man, it's very flowy, it's very beautiful. It's not about strength, it's about using energy and your opponent's strength against them.
Okay. All right. I love that. I have to check it out.
Yeah, you should.
All right. So taking a step back, was that your intro to like this athletic world, to athletics in a way?
No, I got into, I think I've always loved sports. I'm a big sports person, and I've always been big on sports. I've always, and I've said this to you guys before, that I find my tranquility in movement. So I'm always moving, and I got into sports when I was extremely young. In middle school, like I said, like one of my middle school teachers decided to start a track team, and he got a bunch of students. We weren't established as a track team. He just decided, it's like, we need to compete. You know, I want our school to compete. And he got kids who were running in races who were like pretty fast in different distance. And he started training us for 1 mile, and like little by little we became a team, and we started doing cross country in the fall. We started doing like track in the spring, and that's how it started. My sister at that time was doing cross country in high school. So while we, like, this whole concept of us running started coming out for me in middle school, she would bring me to her cross country meets. And so she was like competitive, and she's racing like 3 miles. I think at the time it was like 2.5, and then it changed to 3.1 miles for women. It was like during that time they were doing that transition, and she will have, you know, she'll be completely competitive racing, and then she has her little sister chasing after her, like, we're going too, you know, or like trying to chase her down. And I think that's what it also started, this kind of like, I want to race too, I want to run too.
Yeah, I know she's like, she still is, you know, a consistent motivator, and it just, I guess, a mentor, as a big sister in your life, right?
Oh yeah, she is one of my biggest inspirations. My sister Gio, who is like incredible. She's if you ever get to speak to her, absolutely wonderful runner, athlete, just inspiring in so many ways, and not just personally as a sister, and also as an athlete. She's the number one person who I always want to like secretly beat, you know?
I love that.
And actually I remember the day, because she's so fast, like she's ridiculously fast. And she broke records in the city, like, you know, races and stuff in cross country. And I would always try to like, you know, beat her record. And I didn't achieve it during high school. I actually achieved it a little bit after high school, and I remembered it because I think it was like July 4th. It was actually Independence Day. And she must have been tired because I remember running really hard. And she'll leave you. She's someone who's like, you can't keep up, she'll leave you, you know? So you really have to work hard to like pass her. And I remember passing her, and it was like this kind of like surprise, like, oh my gosh, I passed Gio, which was huge for me. And I ran after that like a crazy maniac, trying to like, because I was like, she's a sleeping dragon, and at any moment she's just gonna wake up and pass me. So I'm running like a maniac, which is good because it showed me that I can keep a really fast pace for a long time. At that point, it must have been like 3 miles, 4 miles, but for me, it was a huge distance. To keep such a fast pace. And when I did pass her, and literally we were like neck to neck, and when I did pass her and I finished, this is not even a race, this is just us running around the park, and I'm taking it super competitive. Like, this is all down, I'm like, you know, like out of breath. She's probably just jogging, and it's so emotional for me. I'm like, freedom, when we finished. I was like literally yelling, I'm like, freedom, I'm free at last, like I passed you. It's so we have this kind of like, you know, like challenge. We have a challenge with each other.
I love that.
And it's always been like, you know, we constantly push each other. Like now she's looking into doing triathlons because I did a triathlon. She's like, okay, I gotta step up, you know.
There you go. Yeah, you both are inspiring each other, right? Your whole life. So I know you started this athletic journey when you were a child, and then you transitioned to doing more track and field in middle school and high school. So did you do this in high school, college as well, or?
No, I actually I did a lot of, I've always been someone who loved exploring different sports. And so I did cross country in high school, but then, you know, I did track, I did indoor track, and I did outdoor track.
In high school?
In high school.
Okay.
And then my freshman year, I started like exploring during tennis. I started doing, I started doing crew. I was a crew member for a while until like, they're like, why don't you become a coxswain? And then I was a coxswain for a while for crew, which was awesome. And then in college, I really wanted to just focus on my studies. It was a big thing for me. Like, going into college, I at that moment, I wanted to do pre-med, so I was super busy all the time, and I ran, I still worked out, I still did a lot of intramural like stuff, but I didn't want to focus my energy on a sport and be committed to a sport. So I really wanted to do good in my studies, so I just did mostly just, you know, schoolwork. And then I went abroad. I went to Italy. I studied Italy for a while, and then I came back, and just a lot of movements and transitions. And in it, I mentioned this before, in it, like I took a year off because there was just so many things happening. And that's when I came back and wanted to get back into sports. I started running again, wanted to do more challenges like longer distance races.
All right, cool. So I definitely want to talk about this, this year off. So what made you come to that decision? And I asked that because I know as students and young adults, they transition into college, folks are really trying to find their identity in that space, right? So what made you come to the very mature decision to say, hey, I'm going to take a step back and try to figure this out?
Yeah, I mean, that was for me a big transition period in my life. Right. When I went to college, I was so excited. I actually went abroad. I was in Italy for a while. I did, I studied Italian. I learned different cultures. And when I came back, I had transferred to a different school, my #1 school, which was Wesleyan at that point. So I went to an even harder, in a way, academic school that was more focused on like the things that I wanted to focus on, which was international government at the time, comparative politics and stuff like that. And in that transition of coming back from abroad, going into a new school, having new friends, just moving, so many things moving, I felt like I lost myself. One of the things that was interesting about Wesleyan was, for a very long time, being an immigrant in this country, growing up in an urban city, going to a high school that was suburb, actually. I did something like a project choice, like but it was like through Future Farmers of America, like FFA, and I went to a suburb school. My identity has always been this kind of about health equity and how things are different, and you know how things are different in Latin America, how things are different in cities, how things are. There's education disparities, there's health inequalities, there's income inequalities, and I felt like even when I was in high school, I was always fighting for that. And then when I came to Wesleyan, it was a very open-minded school where when I would argue in class, I always came down with this identity of like, I am Latina and I have to speak up for Latinos, and I have to speak up for women, and I always went forth with that mentality of like, this is wrong because of this, because of all these inequalities. And at Wesleyan, the discussion was just like, yeah, but what do you think? Yeah, that's great. Those are all identities that you have, but what do you really think? Like, what are your thoughts? And I'm like, those are my thoughts. This is where I'm coming from. And they're like, it started peeling off layers to the point where I'm just like, wait a second, what do I really think? Who am I really? Who am I? What are my, you know? And I've been fighting this for so long. I identify myself like that for so long that it really took me. Like, I almost had like an identity crisis because I had come back from Italy, so I didn't even feel American anymore. I didn't even feel Peruvian, and I was like, I'm not even like, you know, like I'm an immigrant. I'm Peruvian too, and I don't know anything about my roots. And then like there were so many different layers, and I actually got really depressed for a while. I was extremely depressed, and I was just like, there's so many different transitions, so many different things going on that I got super depressed, and it took me, like, for my mental health, I had to take a step back, and that was the most beautiful thing that I did. And I took a step back, and I traveled. And I was like, I need to take some time off, and I need to reconnect with myself. And I went, and I took a whole trip down to Latin America, and I did it by myself, which was really scary for my parents. Of course, they're like, "Oh my god, don't, you know, like, are you gonna be okay?" And I was like, "No, I'm going." And I went deep into the jungle, and I was like living in the jungle for 2 weeks. I went all the way up to Machu Picchu. I ran all the way up to Machu Picchu. I went hiking on like the whole trail of Machu Picchu. I was living in Lima for a while, and I just needed a moment to like reconnect to what does it mean for me, being someone who was born in Peru, to feel Peruvian again, but also to feel American and come back, and because I am American and I'm an immigrant to this country, I'm very much American, and then kind of like understand all my experiences. And during that time, and I said this before, where one of the things that was always true to me was running. I've always been a runner. I've always been, and during the time where this whole transition was happening, I didn't run. I kind of just like stopped running. So once I started running again, it just was something I wanted to continue to do because it was so me. I feel like it was born in me. I feel like I have like Peruvian. Have you ever heard of chaskis?
I have not.
You know what chaskis are? Have you ever heard of like the Incas?
No.
I feel like I have the blood of the chaskis in me. And so the chaskis are these messengers. So the Inca Empire was very huge at one point. It was so wide. It was like, it almost like the Argentina up to like the northern tips. It was Peru, some parts almost Colombia, you know, Ecuador, Bolivia, some of Brazil. It was so vast that in order to get messages from one part of the empire to the other, you had runners who would run long distance through the jungle, through the mountains, to different things, and that's all they were trained to do, and they were born to run. And they would transfer all these different, like the Incas didn't have written languages. They had ropes, which quipus, in which they had like would tell you the people and population in different cities who died, who lived. And so I always feel like, especially when I was in Peru and when I start running and I get into like in just my mind, I always feel like I'm a chaski. I'm just running is in my blood. Like the long distance, the mountains. I'm just like, I can do this. You know? And so I always love, like, I think that was a very beautiful moment for me because I took some time off and it was beautiful to come back and come back renewed with an understanding of who I am and what I wanted to do, and you know, and have running be a big part of it.
Yeah.
I actually did my first marathon after I came back to that. That was like the biggest number one thing I wanted to do. I'm like, I'm gonna run a marathon.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Also, for folks that are watching, if you have any questions, as we always remind you, we want this to be a really engaging conversation. If you're listening to this later on the podcast and you're like, what is he talking about? As I always say, you should have been here. So please make sure you're asking those questions so we can keep this conversation engaging. But I do have a bunch of questions. So you said you started running and you used that as a resource. So can you talk a little bit about that first marathon? Like, what was that like, and how was going through that process of now saying, hey, I traveled a bit, I was in Italy, I was in Spain, I, lost my identity, then I had to go home and then started to reconnect. And I did that using running as a resource, and now you're here at this first race. So how did you get to the place where running came back into your life and now I'm doing a race?
Yeah, I think what's so beautiful about running is that it really, especially endurance running and long distance running, it's an accumulation of small goals that have come together. Of little, it might start off with a big thing. For me, it was just like, when I decided to run a marathon, I hadn't run more than 7 miles. Even with all my racing and all my track and stuff like that, all the sports that I did throughout high school and a little bit throughout college, I never ran more than 7 miles, real racing almost 7 miles. And so the idea of running 26.2 miles was so huge. It was mind-blowing to me at that time. And I was just like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. So again, it was setting small goals, figuring out, well, if I can run 7, maybe I can run 8. If I can run 8, maybe I can do, at that point I haven't even done a half marathon, trying to do a half marathon. And then I've always been a person who likes more information. I love information. So I started getting a book about marathons. I started reading about I actually got into Hal Higgins. He writes a really great book. He's incredible in just understanding the process of what to expect when you run marathons. What are your most common injuries? I always start with what are the most common injuries that can happen if I undertake this task, so I can avoid them and I can prevent it while I'm training, and it started this whole process of for me that was challenging because every few weeks I would run more miles. Every few weeks I would get a little bit faster. And for me, the biggest thing was being able to run below the first marathon below 4 hours. Wow. And when I decided to run that first marathon, my sister Gia, of course, joined in. And she's done a few halves. Actually, she's won a few halves at that point. So she's super competitive. But she's like, wow, you're gonna run a full marathon. I've never even run a marathon. And so she joined in. And then it became a challenge of maybe we can qualify for Boston. That whole idea started maybe we can run and do Boston. Of course, that is always the dream when you start running marathons. You want to qualify for Boston. But for me, it was just I just want to complete it, complete it safely, complete it below 4 hours, and then eventually, qualify for Boston. But it was a lot of work and a lot of figuring things out. It was so new for me. It was a whole new experience that I little by little. I would come up with a challenge, long distance, how to do nutrition for long distance, how to maintain form, how to do different things. So,
I love that.
Yeah.
So just taking in all the information, I love it. So I definitely want to talk a little bit more about, that process of qualifying for Boston. But I do know we have a question in the chat. So before I get to that question, Daniela, can you please let us know what that question is in the chat?
So we have a question from Keisha. Coach Keisha.
Yo, Keisha.
Leslie, you mentioned traveling back to Peru to figure out your identity as an individual within your broader identities. What did you discover about yourself?
Yeah, I discovered, Peru for me was definitely, especially the jungle. I was in deep jungle. almost virgin, I was at the edge of virgin jungle. I discovered what a beautiful country I come from. I discovered what it took for my parents to leave that country. You know, I learned more about the history of what brought us to back to the United States. And for me, it's, I don't know, you feel the power of your ancestors, the courage of your parents, the, you know, like just the journey that people have done for you to be here at this moment, like everybody before you. And it just provides you so much strength and even more strength. And so I feel as an immigrant myself and as a child of immigrants, you always carry that burden of like your parents and all their love, but it even came with me, like at that moment, it's just like, I want to do better, I want to be greater, I want to do more. And so it just inspired me, you mean, just learning about the Incas and like how vast and all the architectures they did, and everything they've done, it literally just opened up, like in my mind, this worlds of opportunities, of ways that I can, you know, excel for me. Like, you know, like challenges that I wanted to grab, you know, and I think maybe the whole idea of a chaski kind of like started my whole idea of running a marathon. I was like, if they can do it through the jungle against jaguars and like, you know, like all, you know, everything that they, in the cold, in the rain, in the mountains, of high altitudes, then maybe I can also just run, you know, 26.2.
I love it. I love it. And again, Keisha, thank you for that question. And again, as another reminder, if we had any new folks join the conversation, please feel free to ask any questions as we go through this conversation, because that is the benefit of having this live, is to make sure you all are able to engage with us. So please, I encourage you to do that. But getting back to this Boston qualifier, so how many races in did you, from your first marathon to the eventual marathon, which you qualified while you were in Philly, which is actually the reason I'm wearing a shirt, because I noticed you qualified. But can you tell me about, you know, since I know the very first marathon wasn't the qualifying one, but you did have this ultimate goal to qualify for Boston.
Right. Then it became, I'm going to qualify for Boston. I think the first marathon was like, can I even do it? You
Under
know?
4 hours, which is a crazy goal.
Can I handle it? Yeah, can I handle it? Can I do it? And then you do it.
Yeah. You
know, and then you achieve it, and you're like knocked out completely. Like when you run your first marathon, even like, you know, with all the training, I remember my parents like took us to a good Peruvian restaurant. We ate like good meat, and then we were like knocked out. Gio and I were like gone. But it's just like to achieve that, it was incredible, and it just opened the door. You know, like the idea of it, like, well, if I can achieve this much, can I achieve it but faster now? You know, and that idea of qualifying for Boston was harder than I thought it would be. Well, it became harder for me than I thought it would be. It took a lot of races. My sister and I every year had the goal of running together one race in the fall. And so she became my training partner for a lot of things. And every June we would like bring up the Hal Higgins training marathons. And we started off with beginning, and then we got into intermediate, and then eventually we went into advanced. And we would train. In my second marathon, I trained like crazy. I was, you know, on top of my mileage. I was even running more mileage. I was eating super healthy. I was doing all these things. And when we ran that second marathon, Gio and I were ready. And we ran, and it was like everything was going to plan. And when I got through the finish line, I knew I was just a little bit off with Boston. It was just literally just a few minutes off. I think at that point, Boston for me was 3:40, and I got in at 3:47. At 3:47, and Gio got in at 3:39. So she made it to Boston. So that's the first time she ran Boston, but I missed it, even with my training. I was just like, it's okay, you brush it off, you know, you're proud that you do another marathon, but it's in you, and you want to run another one. It's hard, the distance is hard. It's over the mileage, like once you get to after 13, the 15, the 16, the 17, the 18, it gets to you. It's a whole mental strength, and it really comes down to training, you know. And I would do another marathon, and the third marathon, we got into a heat wave. And I think it was Chicago, the one that we did. It's a flat course. We did it with I think Team in Training or one of the charity groups. So we had people that we were running with, and we trained beautifully for it. Or what would be beautifully in terms of like mileage, you know. And then when we ran, huge heat wave, completely like they were closing off the marathon hours before. If you can't hit half, you're gonna have to not finish it. So then of course that threw off my time, and it was. Like, okay, that third marathon, I didn't qualify for Boston. I finished the marathon, it was amazing, but I didn't qualify for Boston, and I was like, it's the heat wave. Now I know I have to train in heat waves. And every marathon that I did, I would miss it just by a little bit. Sometimes it would be just life in general. I went back into grad school, or I would be working crazy hours. I was an EMT, and I was going back to school as I transitioned. I went from wanting to do government into getting back into medicine, And that was a huge change for me. I did that when I was 25. That was a huge change. I went back into school. So I was taking pre-med classes, and I was working 80 hours as an EMT, emergency medical technician. So I was, so that affects your training.
Right.
Sometimes it's just life, and sometimes you would run a marathon just hoping you would finish.
So I'm curious, like, what did progress look like for you? Just every step and every stride,
so
progression.
Every step you learn something new. You learn something new about like training in heat, training in rain. You learn something new about like making sure you have good running shoes. You learn more about form. You learn about training in teams. Some people are really good about training in teams. So I joined different teams. I started, especially when I moved to DC, I started joining the Nike Speed club. Then I learned about district triathlon. Then I learned about different things. The Track Tuesday eventually came around. And I would just, Pacers was a big group that I joined for a while, and they're trying to keep pace. But for me, Boston was a journey, because eventually when I came back, I kind of had given up on it. I've always missed it by a little bit. At that point, I had run I think 7 official marathons, because I've run a lot of unofficial marathons that you just run knowing that you just want to run the distance. And so it was a big journey, and it was a big challenge, because every time I ran, I had missed it for some reason, or I didn't train properly, or something had happened. And at the point that I brought it up again, I kind of I was like, whatever, Boston. And then finally I brought it up again into my mindset, and I was just like, I can do this.
Right.
I want to take Boston Challenge and take it seriously, because I think I can achieve this. And when I did it, I looked at everything that I did, and I started training completely different. I actually stopped running. Because everything that I had done at that point was just running more miles, killing my body, doing more speed, and I just kept drilling myself really hard, and I hadn't achieved it. So I stopped running completely. And I got into bikini competition. And because I also wanted to start training my body different, I started lifting different. And when I got into bikini competition, I realized that between January and June, it's very hard for me to train. It's very hard for me to run. It's very hard for me to do different things. So I said, let me do a bikini competition between these times. So I'm still training my body, training it differently, completely different. So I started reaching out to a lot of girlfriends who have done bikini competition, who I saw on my Instagram with beautiful bodies and completely toned. And I was like, I want to look like that. How do I get to look like that?
So what year was this when you started to get into bikini competition?
This is actually really recently. This is 2017.
Oh wow.
Yeah, this is very, very recently.
So what was that training progress like? Like, how'd you balance how'd you balance running and training for these bikini competitions?
So when you do a bikini competition, you really just have to focus on the bikini competition. And they will tell you, because once you do, it's 2 different sports. One is endurance, and you're really training, endurance muscles. And the other one is you're building up muscles and cutting down. And so, and sometimes they contradict each other. You know, they really go against each other in the sense of, you want to build up muscles, you want to cut down muscles, but if you go out and do 18 miles, you might be cutting completely everything that you built up for. and it was very hard for someone who's a runner and extremely active that way and who loves endurance races to be like, okay, I'm going to trust the process here. And when I took bikini competition, I actually went and talked to one of my girlfriends who wanted to get into the training of training and coaching someone who was doing bikini competition, or who was going to go through a bikini competition. And she's like, you can be my guinea pig. And I'm like, I'm happy to be your guinea pig. And so it was a very close relationship of learning. Again, it's the whole learning process, because you would send me a whole, these are all the exercises you have to do. And with one of the good things that I learned about bikini that I took with me in running is that form is everything in lifting. Right. You can be lifting, but if you have your traps involved, you're like completely not involving the muscles that you want to involve. Right. So you have to learn to take the traps, like your muscles, certain muscles out of your of when you lift. You know, you have to learn how to lift, because you can really injure yourself if you start lifting badly, big things. And you learn how to build things up, and you learn about nutrition and how to eat properly, how to build how to eat proteins, what not to eat. Apparently, I eat way too many chocolates, which is the thing about endurance running, like this concept that you can eat whatever and you can run beautifully, and but like I love sweets, and in bikini, like no sugars, no alcohol, which was extremely hard,
And this was like from January to June? Or?
January to June. So I cheated because I started in February after my birthday. So I started at the end of February.
You just I
needed it. I needed the bubblies. I wanted the bubblies. So then I started at the end of February, and then I was in it. I lost a little bit of time, of course. So I was really in it. I was like, oh God, I gotta catch up. But it taught me about form. My legs were incredibly strong, like my glutes were extremely strong, which is beautiful for runners. Really training your glutes, really training your abs, really training your back. We don't train enough of that for us. Your core. And what I realized was when I came back into the mentality of I'm going to take Boston serious, I was extremely fit. And I came back stronger, and I thought that it wasn't going to work out because I was like, I'm not running, how's this working out? But I came in extremely strong at a point where I normally train in June, and then I can just build up the miles. And when I started building up the miles, again, I changed my whole strategy. Before, I would run by myself a lot. The long distance, I would run by myself, and I would really push it. I made sure I was running with groups. I made sure I was running with people who were faster than me, who would normally scare me. I would be terrified to run with them because I knew that, like how, like sometimes you run with people who are like, like overall, they're probably not like super fast than you, but like, you're gonna suffer. Like, you don't want to run with them because it's gonna hurt. It's like, man, I'm really gonna be speeding. I'm really gonna be running throughout this. I would run with those people that would make me suffer and hurt because it made me better. But I also would run slower miles, and I learned about stretching and yoga. One of the other things I learned about bikini competition is the importance of a rest day. Like Friday nights, for when I was doing my bikini competitions, I would do yoga all day. All day whenever I had a chance, and I would not go out, I would not drink. I would take that day for myself. I would do yoga and just cleanse my mind, and it was beautiful for mental health, and it was beautiful just to like relax the body. Because then you're set up for longer distance on Saturday and on Sundays, So then Boston came, and the biggest challenge for Boston for me was that at the point when I originally took Boston, it was 3:40 was the timing that I wanted to be. And Boston at that time had decreased. Everybody has gotten faster in the world. Everybody has better shoes, better protein, better shapes.
Everybody's getting faster.
Everybody's super fast now. And so it was 3:35 was my fastest time. And for me, that's mind-blowing, And so there comes the whole point of also like believing in yourself and having confidence and like really working on that mental strength and doing that kind of stuff. Like challenging yourself, running with other faster people are ways that you can, push that.
So staying on that, just did self-doubt play a role at all as you?
Absolutely. Oh my God, I couldn't sleep the night before. Yeah, no, absolutely. It's super like like you're running, you know, like and then you tell everybody, right?
Yeah.
That's the other thing that you do.
Yeah.
You set yourself up by telling everybody you're gonna do it.
I mean,
I'm gonna run Boston. I'm gonna qualify for Boston. I told everybody that I knew that would hold me accountable for it.
and what was your goal race to qualify for Boston? Well,
So,
at the end 2017.
At that point, I focused on beating 3:30.
Okay.
Yeah, at that point I focused on beating 3:30, and
Yeah.
so that was my goal. So I worked really, really hard on, like, you know, with track. I always did track. I took a day off. I made sure I was running with people for long distance, and I made sure that I was in the range that I wanted to do.
Yeah.
I remember for one of the races, Jules was one of my girlfriends that I would run long distance. She's super fast too. She's the person I would be like, oh, I'm gonna die running with her. But I remember for one of our long distance, and this is where I knew I was ready, and I needed a race. I needed this, and I needed to run with her. We ran I work for Children's. So Children's has this 5K race for every child. It's beautiful. It happens around October. It's great. It's good support for bringing in money for kids who are very, very sick in the hospital.
Is that here in DC?
It's in DC. It's usually in October. So
do they still host this race at all?
They do. They might do it virtual this year, but it's a great race. And that day I was gonna run 20 miles, and I ran with Jules, and Jules and I like raced the 5K, and we're like sprinting as fast as you can. I think we were like 6-minute mile pace, like throughout this 5K, right? And then literally, I think we placed for the 5K, and then we kept running. And we ran the 17 miles that we needed to run for the whole training program. And we kept it at a really good pace. And because of that, I knew that I had a really good chance of keeping my goal. It opened my eyes. I'm like, I'm good, I'm ready. But I was still terrified when I ran the race. I was horrified.
I bet. All right. So I know we have, before I get to my next question, because now we're starting to get closer to, Leslie actually get into that Philly race where she qualified for Boston. And I'm really curious to hear about what that process was like and what her approach was. But before I get there, I want to make sure we answer the question in the chat.
The question and the minds are aligned. With Lip Gloss wants to know, what was your Boston qualifier race and how did you select it? Was the course a factor?
Are you reading my cards? No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I chose the Philly marathon because it was the later one of the year. It's November. You run the risk of getting into snow, and hail, which Ryan learned when he signed me up for the Philly a few years later, and we suffered. But yeah, I chose Philly, and it's also the flattest course. So I knew I wanted to run. I didn't want a hill to be my deter from getting where I wanted to get. So I did choose Philly because it's a flat course and it's the later race of the year.
All right, cool. I love it. So going into race day, again, you've now done seven marathons to this point. So what was your approach on race day? Like how did you get through that?
It was a focus. I don't think I slept the night before. I was like tossing and turning. I felt like I missed a race. I woke up thinking that I was like, oh no, I totally missed a race. And then I woke up, and you go through your thing. I always eat a banana because I always think bananas so good for you before a race. I drink water, and I made sure I got up early, and I went to the pacer. And I introduced my 3:30 pacer. I introduced myself to him because in my mind, I'm like, I can do it. But like, I'm still stuck that every time I try to run this marathon for Boston, I couldn't even qualify for the 3:40. So I'm like, I can do it. Like 3:30, 10 minutes faster in general, right? Like I can do it. And I went up to the pacer and was like, my name is Leslie, and I'm gonna qualify for Boston. I'm gonna be with you the whole time. I just came up with it. I'm like, I'm not gonna lose you. I'm gonna finish the race. And I had a strategy that I was gonna keep with my pacer up to mile 18.
Okay.
Because by 18, I knew I could run like the 6 that were like left, right, or whatever that was left. And I was like, mile 18, see how I feel. Mile 20. See how I feel, and then go forward with it. So yeah, and then my other strategy was to get out of my head. And in order to get out of my head, actually Jules, again, came up with this beautiful just tip. And she's like, every 5 miles or every mile, just think of someone that you're incredibly grateful for and run that mile for that person.
Right.
And for me, that was such a beautiful tip because every 5 miles, I had one person I had chosen in my life that I was incredibly grateful for. And I would focus, and it becomes a mind game for you. You focus until you get to mile 5, and you're like, yay, this mile. While I was running that mile, I would think of that person, the whole mile. I would think of all the memories that and why they made me happy or sad or, you know, whatever it was that I wanted to run for, you know.
Right.
Sometimes it would be people, like, you know, that made me really happy. Sometimes it would be people who challenged me and made me really sad or angry, but they were good for me to think about because, you know, it pushed me for those next 5 miles.
Yeah.
And then before you know it, you're at mile 20,
Yeah.
and you're like, oh my gosh, I did it. Like I stayed with my pacer up to mile 20, and once I knew that I was within pace, I took off. Like I was celebrating. I just flew. Like I was one of like the fastest. I probably like felt like I was running. I was just like sprinting all the way. I feel like I probably could have run a little bit faster towards the end. But for some reason in my mind, I thought you had to run up the rocky stairs towards the finish. So I don't know, I just like misread that whole concept so in my head, I felt like the finish was up the rocky stairs. Yeah. So I was like saving up some energy because I was like, I gotta go up the stairs, So by the time I finished, I was like, wait, what happened to the stairs?
Yeah.
So
that's hilarious.
Yeah, no, but I did it, and then that opened up like my whole mind of doing so many other things for me. Like I think for me as an athlete, I know I'm a strong athlete. I know I take on challenges. I know once I want to do something, like my mind is there. Yeah. Boston for me was hard, was because I over and over again, even no matter what I gave it to it, I failed a little bit. I missed it. It went out of my reach. It was out of my grasp. For me, it was just kind of like, I know I could put in all this stuff, and I wasn't able to achieve it, you know? And so it took me to come in from a different mindset, not from a running mindset. It came for me to come out from an athlete mindset. Be like, how can I challenge myself and my body in a different way? And I went into bikini. I went into something completely different for me to be able to achieve that goal.
So what did it feel like to actually achieve that goal? And then next, I want to talk about actually getting to race day. So you cross the finish line. You don't have to go up the rocky steps. That's a win. So what did it feel like once you crossed that?
I was just ecstatic. It was so funny, and I don't know why I felt this, but I felt like I was officially a runner. You know, I was like, I'm officially a runner. I run in like all these races and all these distances, and I'm like, I'm officially a runner now. You know. Yeah. So no, it was big. I think for me it was a big goal. Especially and now I'm just it opened up the world of it was such a big challenge because it was a mental challenge for me. It was like a little mini mental break for me where I was just like, I can achieve this at any distance, you know? Now my biggest goal, you want to hear it in the future? I want to break sub 3. Yeah, I want to run a marathon in sub 3.
Alright.
Yeah,
I love it.
It was because of Ilya Kipchoge. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna do it. He can do a sub 2. I want to do a sub 3. You know, and I'll see when I do it. But it might take a few marathons. It might take a few things, but it might take different challenges. But I want to see.
All right, I love it.
Yeah.
Again, as a reminder, if folks in the chat have a question, please make sure you put those in the chat. We're going to get to that as much as we can. So Danny, I know you said we had a question.
We have two things.
All right.
With Lip Gloss wants to know if you had a backup race to Philadelphia to qualify for Boston. If so, what course? And then Keisha says that the tip of thinking about specific folks in your life for those 5 miles is something that they're going to be trying. Also, the chat has been congratulating the both of you on your new home.
Woohoo!
Thank you.
That was a big challenge too. Oh my gosh, that was all the way to the end. It was a marathon.
That was a marathon in itself.
It We just sort of met a homeowners.
I know. So did you have a backup plan, or were you like committed to this?
Brilliant. I should have, but I was just
All
so committed. I was just like, I'm gonna do this. This is it. You know.
I love it.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. So what was actually, now you're here in Boston? What was your favorite memory from the race?
You know what's so funny? I think training for Boston for me was more of a memorable moment than running Boston.
That's right.
Because you know, like there's also training for Boston afterwards. Like you're actually training for the race that, you know, it was kind of like I did it. But for me, after I qualified for Boston, I did Speed Project.
Okay. And what's Speed Project for the folks
Speed
that don't
Project, oh my gosh, I don't even remember the mileage anymore. So it's like 300 plus miles between Los Angeles all the way to Las Vegas. It's a group of 6 people,
Okay.
and you run as fast as you can through the desert at night. It's an underground racing, so you don't even have a course set up. You're just running through the streets. For Rocky, we had one of our runners who actually got bit by a dog. This is how, like, you know, it's not organized, you know.
Yeah.
You're in a van, you're running, you're like, I did it with District Tri. It was incredible. But right after I did Boston, I immediately started training for the Speed Project, and then wait, I'm messing up my timelines. I think that I started training after I did my Ironman. I started doing a Speed Project. And then I ran for Boston. So it was right after my Ironman, I did Speed Project, and then Boston. And so, as you can imagine, I was dead.
Yeah.
I was done.
Yeah.
So for me, Boston was, thank you.
You're welcome. Sorry, folks.
Boston was more of I'm here,
Yeah.
I made it, I'm alive, I survived the desert, and I'm just gonna run it and enjoy it. I was like literally waving and being happy, and it was not about speed for me. It was just enjoying the moment. I will run to Boston where I will run it to run it. But
I love it.
for me, it was just enjoying the moment at that point. And you have to give yourself a break sometimes. You're like, I got this far. I'm good.
I love it. And we didn't even get into the triathlon conversation, but I think one more question about the running. Thinking about the Speed Project, what was your favorite memory from that outside of Rocky getting bit by that dog?
No, I mean, that was my favorite memory. Just like I felt bad for Rocky, but he was so awesome. He actually got injured pretty bad, and then it brought us down to like 5 runners, and then he actually came and ran the end part of it. He got up and ran, which was incredible. Yeah, he's recovering too from an accident, so he's doing awesome. I think my most memorable moment was Keisha actually did an awesome thing in Speed Project.
What was that?
She did a new course that no one had tried.
All right.
And so what normally is Speed Project, when people run from one area to another, what is the most traveled path? We didn't do that.
Yeah.
We instead of going like around the path, we went through the mountains and cut through. And so when you saw it in the radar, and because they track you, they're tracking a phone, and you saw our group, District Tri, like it just looked like we were lost. Yeah. Everybody else is running from one area, and then we were lost at a completely different part. That it looked like our phone was stolen. In fact, they were like, "Oh my God, their phone got stolen. Where are they going?" Yeah. And when it was unraveled, like when they started seeing that our project was completely different and the path that we were taking was completely different and it hasn't been tried before, it made us into these like very competitive underdogs. Because if it had gone as planned, we would have, cut miles and be right into the really competitive group. So I thought it was really brilliant of Keisha to not think, to think completely outside the box. Be like, what else can be done here?
She continues to be a really impressive person. If you don't know who Keisha is, make sure you go back. I think episode 3 or 4 where she came on and she shared her story. So, and she's in the chat. So Keisha, post up a comment real quick so people can know how to connect with you. But as I know time is wrapping up, and again, we didn't even really get to dive into the conversation about your triathlon experience, but can you quickly tell me about how did you hear about the sport of triathlon? And we're not going to talk about the first race, but how did you get to your first Ironman? Ultra triathlon?
So Ironman, I saw Ironman when I was very little, when I was 12 years old, and that inspired me. And I always wanted to do one. It was always on my bucket list.
Yeah.
It was kind of like the idea of like, oh my gosh, like before it was like 26.2 miles. Now I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm swimming, I'm cycling 112 miles, and then running a whole marathon. Like my mind was blown. I was like, I have no idea how this could be achieved, but it can be achieved.
Right.
Someone else has achieved it, you know, and so it becomes like how to do it effectively for yourself, you know. And so again, you gather as much information as possible, and I always go back to the first thing. It's like, what is the most? I think it's my healthcare background. It's like, what are the most common injuries that can happen? What is the worst thing that can happen? And then I researched the hell out of it. Like I go crazy. I was like, oh my gosh, you know, like shoulder injuries, knee injuries, whatever it is, and then how to prevent it.
Yeah.
So throughout my training, I always make sure that I don't do like the most common mistakes for these injuries, and make sure, because that's the number one thing as an athlete for me. You know, I identify myself as an athlete, and I want to be a long-term athlete. I have this dream. I'm going to be 133 years old. It is a long time to live, and I don't want to be there with injuries. I want to still be running. And so prevention is key for me, always key. And in order to have that understanding, you have to understand what the end goal is, and the end goal is not to be injured.
Right.
And how do you prevent injuries? Is knowing about them. You have to know what the injuries are in the sports that you play.
Like you said,
you know?
that knowledge, right, is really important.
Yeah.
So thinking about, as you're training for this ultra distance triathlon, or as others may know it, an Ironman, what was your favorite memory in preparing for that race? And also, as follow-up to that question, what would you tell somebody that's preparing for their first Ironman race in 2021? Because 2020 has.
Virtual. It's all virtual. For me, the biggest thing is swimming. You're gonna have to just get through it, because it doesn't make the race. If you're a great swimmer or if you're not, it doesn't make the race. The biggest thing that makes the race is the cycling. It's the biggest portion of the race. It's the biggest time you're going to be on the bike. It's really what makes the race.
Right.
If you're a good cyclist, you really, like, even when I did my Ironman, I trained, like I selected the Ironman in Florida because it was going to be a flat course. But I trained for hills. Every week I was training for hills. I trained for the worst areas. What happens if I am running a hill? And I did.
Yeah.
Hurricane Michael.
That changed the race.
Changed the race.
Yeah.
And I was in a hilly course.
Wow.
But the biggest portion of an Ironman is the bike. So train for the bike.
Yeah.
And then the one thing that people don't train for are the breaks. The transition of a bike between a bike and running. Those are hard. It is hard. And if you don't train for it, if you don't put in the time for it, some people just train for the bike and that's it. And then they forget your muscles are tired once they go from bike to running.
Yeah.
Those are key components. So biking and
training for those breaks. All right.
Because at the end of the day, like I'm a runner.
Yeah.
So I will finish the race because I'm a runner. But definitely training between those two.
Okay. So thinking about 2021, right now we're in these COVID times, right? So really quickly, I'm curious about how are you keeping yourself motivated during this year?
But so COVID has changed a lot of training for many of my groups. For me, it was hard because I was still working throughout the whole time.
Yeah.
I was going to work every day, and so it for me, I had to take a little bit of a break and just focus on being mentally okay with everything that was going on in terms of the healthcare world.
Okay. All right. I love it. So, you're doing these bikini competitions, you're a runner, and you're doing, obviously, triathlon. I'm really curious to know, like, what has athletics taught you as a person? And what has athletics taught you as a person?
That you need to be ever evolving.
Okay.
Time changes, things,
All right. So, just for, do we have any last questions in the chat? No? Cool. So for folks that want to continue the conversation as we have to wrap it up, where can they follow you at?
Prado223 is my Instagram, but just call me, text me, get in touch with me somehow.
All right, cool. And we always like to ask this last question. If you had to marry one, kiss one, kill one, swim, bike, run, what would it be?
Marry one?
Marry one, kiss one, kill one.
I would marry the bike, kissed the bike, married the run, and killed the run. So.
All right, I love it. I love it. Again, for folks that want to continue the conversation.
Very cool.
She's like, all right.
I'm fine. I'll just ride.
Thanks.
Again, thank you everybody for joining in. I know we're about to wrap up the IG Live, so stay connected, and we look forward to sharing this more in the podcast later. Peace, y'all. And also want to make sure we thank our sponsors and our partners, Athletic Brewing Company, Urban Athletic Club. We have our bi-weekly workouts here in DC, and also, what am I thinking about? Sorry. So Urban Athletic Club, Athletic Brewing Company, Philly Bike Expo, and District Cycle Works. Without those folks' support, we definitely couldn't be making a lot of things that we're making happen. And also, if folks want to continue the conversation, you know how to follow us, Perfect Time in Multisport. And also, that's on the podcast, that's on our vlog, right? That's also on our Instagram. So let's keep the conversation going, y'all. And again, thank you for joining in. Peace.